It's time for the finals matchup in our search to find the greatest Super Bowl team of all time. We've reached the final round of our bracket, and today we have the 1989 49ers versus the 1978 Pittsburgh Steelers, and we look forward to breaking that down here coming up in the podcast. But before that, we're going to get into some of the feedback from our listeners on perhaps some teams we should have put in that didn't make it. We have 3 of those we'll break down as well. And without further ado, let's get into our finals episode for our great Super Bowl champion of all time.
Okay, we're ready for our final show on the Super Bowl Champions Bracket, finding the greatest Super Bowl champion of all time, right here on the Press Box Podcast. I'm Ralph Miranda. My co-host, Joseph Miranda, will join me shortly. And we've arrived at the championship matchup. From the AFC side, it was the 1978 Pittsburgh Steelers, the 3rd seed, advancing to the championship game to take on the NFC champion, the 1989 San Francisco 49ers, who were also the 3rd seed in the NFC bracket. Let me go over again for those of you, I know you've probably all heard this already, but for our new listeners, how we arrived at these teams. The 3 of us, myself, Joseph, and our producer Nathan, all sat down privately and put together our list of 8 AFC and 8 NFC Super Bowl champions that we thought were the best. We compared our lists. Anytime 3 of the same teams were on all our lists, they were automatically in. If there were 2 teams that were on our lists, then we talked about them and more than likely put them in. And then if we all had different teams, we discussed it from there. We arrived at 8 teams on each side. In the AFC, our bracket was the 1972 Miami Dolphins. They were the 1 seed. The 1976 Oakland Raiders were the 2 seed. The 1978 Pittsburgh Steelers were the 3 seed. The 2004 New England Patriots were the 4th seed. The 1998 Denver Broncos were the 5th seed. The 1986 New York Jets were the 6th seed. The 2000 Baltimore Ravens were the 7th seed, and the 2006 Indianapolis Colts were the 8th seed. On the NFC side, the 1985 Chicago Bears were the 1 seed. The 1991 Washington Redskins were the 2 seed. The 1989 San Francisco 49ers were the 3 seed. The 1986 New York Giants were the 4th seed. The 1966 Green Bay Packers were the 5th seed. The 1977 Dallas Cowboys were the 6th seed. The 1996 Green Bay Packers were the 7th seed. And the 1993 Dallas Cowboys were the 8th seed. We went through the brackets. Here we are. We have our championship matchup. But before we go into that, as we did with our World Series champions bracket, we want to discuss some of the feedback we've gotten from our listeners. And Joseph, I'll kind of let you, or I guess I'll let Nathan.
Well, just to kind of touch on that, just like we did in baseball, we only picked 16 teams for the bracket,
right?
And which means obviously there's some teams that we left out that were good Super Bowl winning teams.
Correct.
So I think we have 3 here that Nathan will read to us of some feedback we got from listeners that thought maybe should have been included in the bracket. So Go ahead and start.
Remember, that's a really good point, Joseph. And you can also check out the bracket on Twitter. Our Pressbox @PressboxPod is our Twitter account. We put our original bracket on there. We put our bracket after our first round on there. You can always go to PressboxPod to find the brackets for our Super Bowl champions and follow the progress of this championship matchup.
Yeah, every time we post a new episode, we'll update the bracket.
Correct.
All right, so we'll start with the first team we got that was left off the bracket that we got some feedback on, the 1975 Pittsburgh Steelers. They were 12-2, first in the AFC Central, coached by Chuck Noll. They beat the Colts in the divisional round. They beat the Raiders in the conference championship, and they beat the Dallas Cowboys in the Super Bowl 21-17. Very similar to the 78 Steelers, who we'll get to soon. But I don't know. I'm sure there's some differences you can talk about.
Yeah, they were on my original list. I had 2 Steeler teams on my original list: the 78 Steelers and the 75 Steelers. And 75 Steelers were a repeat Super Bowl champion. Of course, they won their first Super Bowl in '74. The reason I didn't push harder to have them included is, one, they only played 14 games as opposed to 16 games. Two, the rules were different in 75 than they were in 78. The defenses were allowed to do so much more, and the Steelers really weren't a passing team back then. They were a running football team. Terry Bradshaw had yet to come into his own. He was still kind of a game manager more than he was a guy that could win you the game like he was in 78 and 79. Now, their defense, though, was better. I think the defense in 75 and 76 was better than the defense in 78. The reason I say that is because those guys were really in their prime then. When you got to 78 and 79, a lot of those guys were getting a little bit older, and I don't think they were quite as good as they were in 75. But obviously we can't include everybody, and the 78 Steelers were just a little bit more prolific offensively than the 75 Steelers were.
Yeah, and that's the idea there is looking at those two teams pretty similar, only 3 years apart. So we wanted to take one Steelers team from that decade, and for the reasons we just talked about, we thought the 78 Steelers were better.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Next team, the 2013 Seattle Seahawks. They were 13-3, finished first in the NFC West, coached by Pete Carroll. They beat the Saints in the divisional round, beat the 49ers in the conference championship, and they beat the Broncos 43-8 in the Super Bowl.
Right.
Yeah, I actually had them on my original list. We talked about a number of defenses here, and the Seahawks were another team where defense really carried them that year. The Legion of Boom.
Right.
We talked about the Steel Curtain and the no-name defense, but I think that defense is will go down as one of the better defenses in NFL history. And especially what they did in the Super Bowl to Peyton Manning and the Broncos, who the Broncos had a record-setting year that year. I think Manning set the touchdown record at the time, and that offense.
It was outside New York, though.
That didn't help. that didn't help the Broncos, definitely.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the, in my opinion, the most legitimate feedback team we could have got. I think they could easily be in there. Maybe over the 91 Redskins, or I think we even talked about them in the 96 Packers a little bit. But I think what hurts them a little bit is the offense with Russell Wilson. Especially that season, just his second season in the league.
Right.
We've used the term a lot. More of a game manager. And maybe when you're talking about the bracket in a big game against one of these teams, like with a Montana or Brady, or I don't think they would have held up as well.
I guess
they'd have a good year.
I guess playing the Super Bowl in the elements doesn't really hold up because the Broncos played in Denver outside.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But Peyton Manning always seemed like he didn't really like the cold.
No, he didn't. No, he wasn't much of a cold dude.
Which is why I wonder why he went to Denver. I don't know.
And what I'm about to say is going to sound crazy, but one of the reasons why I didn't look at them as a legitimate entry into our bracket is because of what they did the next year. I mean, in 2014, all you got to do is run the ball on the goal line, and you're a back-to-back Super Bowl champion. And I think that would have made that 2000 team look so much better, in my opinion.
Sure, but
2013.
I mean, the 2013 team.
But
if they would have been able to go ahead and back it up.
But that point that they were just one run player away basically shows that they were still a Super Bowl caliber team the next season.
They were.
Whether they ran the ball or not.
You're right.
It looks better to have back-to-back Super Bowls.
You're right. You're exactly right.
But it's also a good point. If they win, then you're looking at a back-to-back Super Bowl champion, where we have a lot of those in the bracket.
A lot of those.
So you take those 2 years a little more seriously. Like, we got to put them in there. This gives you a little more clout.
No.
I mean, if you look at
so you can look at it as they already are kind of that, though, because they
are.
If you look at our bracket, of course, I guess you could make a case either way for them. I mean, we got the 68 Jets, who were a one-time winner, but we obviously know why they were in there because of the guarantee and the team they beat and the first AFL team to win the Super Bowl. That team carried a lot more weight. But the 2006 Indianapolis Colts were a one-time winner. But again, they beat the Patriots. The Patriots were the team. So I mean, there's a lot of reasons why we included some of those teams in there. Whereas the Seahawks, I mean, they're still legitimate. I mean, I think it's a legitimate feedback. I mean, there's no question. And then what was the third one that was mentioned?
The third one was last season, the 2019 Kansas City Chiefs, who were 12-4, first in the AFC West, coached by Andy Reid. They beat the Texans in the divisional round. They beat the Titans in the conference championship. And they beat the 49ers 31-20 in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, the 2019 Kansas City Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes obviously coming off his MVP season from the year before. he was obviously a great player. I don't look at that team being as a team that could be in the talk for the greatest Super Bowl champion ever. The Texans had. If the Texans don't make stupid coaching decisions, they go out in the first round.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah.
What exactly happened? They've been 51-31. What happened to that game?
The Texans jumped out to 24-0.
24-0.
That's right. They did. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong. You got to give the Chiefs credit for coming back the way they did.
That's right.
But the Texans let them come back.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
You got that, and then you've got, in the Super Bowl, if Garoppolo hits that pass, that's, we thought the Super Bowl winning quarterback should be able to do, or Super Bowl caliber quarterback, they lose that game.
And if I'm not mistaken, in the AFC Championship game, didn't the Titans have a 10-0 lead on them too? I think they did.
I don't recall exactly, but
they had a lead at one point.
I think they did. So, I don't.
And when you combine that with the 12-4 record,
Chiefs are
just if you're a dominant team, you go 14-2 at least. I think.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's yet to be seen what they're going to do this season, but I don't think they're going to sniff the Super Bowl this season, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, they may not. It depends.
But then again, the Patriots are non-factor now.
That's true.
And the Buccaneers are not going to be.
Yeah, I say not sniffing the Super Bowl is a little hard.
Okay.
I don't think they're the favorite to win it again.
No.
I think, but I think Nathan makes a really good point. The fact that Tom Brady left the Patriots gives them a decided edge to repeat. To get back there because
unless you want to go into the assumption that the Buccaneers are just going to take the place of the Patriots now as that team you have to beat, which is not good.
But they're not in the AFC.
Yeah, but then they would face them in the Super Bowl.
That's true.
I don't think that's going to happen either, but that's for another podcast. Yeah. So I guess my final take on the feedback, great feedback from our listeners, but the 75 Steelers and the 2013 Seahawks, legitimate teams to be considered, but I don't think that the 19 Chiefs.
I agree.
And the 75 Steelers, you didn't consider them, but you consider like a version of them in the 78 Steelers. The Seahawks team was completely like
that's true. Well, that's true.
You know what I mean? The only real snub, I guess, would have been that Seahawks team because you have basically the same Steelers team.
But to me, and I'll say one final thing, what makes the Steelers such a great team in the 70s was their two Super Bowl wins in 74 and 75 were totally different than the 78-79. In other words, in 74-75, they were a running football team that played great defense. In 78 and 79, they were a passing football team that played adequate defense, if that makes any sense. Still great defense, but not to the level that they played in 74 and 75. So I guess my point is they basically reimagined themselves to win those second two Super Bowls.
Do you think that defense was kind of cut down a notch due to the the rule changes of what you could do on defense, or do you think it was more they just didn't have as talented of a defense?
That's a good point. I think it was a little bit of both. I think the rule changes affected them, but I think a lot of their players were getting old. Or older.
All right. So, like we said, good feedback. Let's get into the championship matchup here.
All right, let's do it.
Nathan?
All right, so we have the 3 seed 1978 Pittsburgh Steelers facing off against the 3 seed 1989 San Francisco 49ers, 2 3 seeds. 78 Steelers were 14-2, first in the AFC Central, coached by Chuck Noll. They beat the Broncos in the divisional round that season. They beat the Houston Oilers in the conference championship, and they beat the Dallas Cowboys 35-31 in the Super Bowl. The 89 49ers were 14-2, first in the NFC West, coached by George Seifert. Beat the Vikings in the divisional round. They beat the LA Rams in the conference championship, and they beat the Denver Broncos 55-10 in the Super Bowl.
All right, so first, real quick, we mentioned this. We talked about this a little earlier before we started recording. Obviously, this is the first match we've had where the seeds are the same, 3 seed versus 3 seed, because we've been on one side of the bracket, and they both won 14-2.
Right.
So there's no obvious choice of where we're going to play this game, so we'll just throw that out, perhaps.
Okay, let's
throw that out. So, because we were talking about where this game to be played at, but unless you have some thoughts.
Well, since it's the championship, let's just treat this as the Super Bowl neutral of our bracket. So it's a neutral, Miami, it's a dome.
We're essentially throwing it out. Like I said.
Playing a neutral site.
Right. So, so going into this matchup, we looked at a lot of factors coming in here. Start with the coaching matchup. I think you got to give the edge to Chuck Noll.
I agree.
As we've mentioned many times, Seifert, not what Bill Walsh was.
What was the line you used in our last podcast?
You just keeping the Ferrari in the right lane. And he was able to do it, which is credit to him.
You think I could have coached them to Super Bowl?
Probably. Yeah, probably. All you have to do is just don't get in their way.
Well, I have an offensive coordinator to call plays. So I can call,
Just don't get away.
So you can go ahead and start with some of the statistics, rankings, and then I'll talk a little about some positional players.
All right. I did kind of a side-by-side analysis to break down some of the statistics. And if you look at the offensive or overall rank on offense, the Steelers were 8th in the league in 78. They averaged 312 yards per game. The 49ers were 1st in the league in 1989, and they averaged 392 yards per game. When you look at the passing game, the Steelers were 12th in the league. They averaged 169 yards a game passing. The 49ers were 2nd in the league, averaging 269 yards passing. Running the football, the Steelers were 14th in the league. They averaged 143 yards a game. The 49ers were 10th in the league, averaging 123 yards a game. When you look at defense, somewhat comparable. The Steelers were 3rd in the league on defense overall, giving up 260 yards a game. The 49ers were 4th in the league overall, giving up 289 yards a game. Against the pass, the Steelers were 12th in the league on defense, giving up an average of 150 yards a game passing. The 49ers were 11th in the league, giving up an average of 202 yards passing per game. The interesting stat, which unless you break it down this way, you don't really see it, is the Steelers were 2nd in the league against the run. The 49ers were 3rd in the league against the run. But if you look at a per-game average, the Steelers gave up 110 yards a game rushing. The 49ers only gave up 87 yards a game rushing. So a pretty significant difference when you break it down yards per game.
Yeah.
Scoring, the Steelers were 5th in the league on offense and scoring, averaging 22 points a game. The 49ers obviously 1st in the league. They averaged 28 points a game. On defense, the Steelers were 1st in the league, giving up an average of 12 points a game. The 49ers were 3rd in the league, giving up an average of 16 points a game. And then when you look at takeaways, the Steelers were +9. They turned the ball over 39 times, took it away 48. The 49ers were +12, turned it over 25 times, took it away 37 times.
Yeah, so that breakdown there, if you take each of those statistics and give a check mark to the winner, the 49ers come out, I think, 5-4. That's what we had. So it's pretty even there.
Yes, pretty even.
One thing I think you can contribute the turnover rate to is Montana's ability to take care of the ball better than Bradshaw.
Right.
Which kind of leads us into some of these positional matchups here. We give the edge to the 49ers at quarterback with Montana. That season specifically, Bradshaw threw 20 interceptions. Montana only threw 8.
Right.
And especially if you're playing in a big game like this, we've said Montana no interceptions in the Super Bowl, so he gets the edge there. Although Bradshaw was kind of the first Montana. He won 4 Super Bowls in a decade.
Right.
Went undefeated in Super Bowls. Montana did that in the '80s, but just did it a little better than Bradshaw, I think.
Right.
Running backs wise, we gave the edge to the Steelers. Franco Harris and Rocky Blyer, a good 1-2 punch there. Versus Roger Craig and Rathman, where Blyer and Harris are a little more of, I think, a threat than Craig and Rathman. Rathman was a threat to catch the ball out of the backfield, but as far as pure running game,
he was a blocker more than anything.
Right, more of a blocker, not much effect on the running game. Wide receiver, 49ers get the edge there. The greatest receiver of all time, pretty inarguably, is Jerry Rice. Compare that with John Taylor and Brent Jones, who's a really good tight end.
Right.
And then, you count Craig and Rathman out of the backfield. More of a receiving threat than Blyer and Harris.
No question.
You give the edge to the 49ers really over Swan and Stallworth there.
Let me add something to that real quick that I just kind of thought about after the fact. In fact, it just popped into my head when you were reading the quarterback numbers, is that, obviously Montana has the better numbers, and I would always side with Montana over Bradshaw as far as greatest of all time between the two of them. But the Steelers in '78, they had kind of that Raider mentality. They threw the ball deep down the field a lot, okay? Oh, yeah. And when you throw the ball deep down the field a lot, you're going to get some interceptions. Remember, the 49ers ran that West Coast offense. It was very precision passing. They took their shots down the field to Jerry Rice, but they never put themselves in harm's way a lot. You know what I mean? So some of those numbers, especially the interception numbers, maybe would be skewed a little bit by the difference in philosophy.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
I agree with that. Looking at the defense here a little bit, defensive tackles, or defensive line, basically.
Right.
Give the edge to the Steelers. Steel curtain, especially their front.
Right.
Greenwood, White, Joe Green, definitely give the edge there. Linebackers again, I think you got to go with the Steelers.
Got to.
It does take some good linebackers to beat the likes of Matt Millen and Romanowski and those guys, but the Steelers had some of the greatest linebackers of all time. So Ham and Lambert,
two Hall of Famers.
Yeah,
right
so definitely give the edge there. And then the secondary, again, Steelers. You've got Ronnie Lott, one of the all-time great safeties, Hall of Famer, but the Steelers just had multiple guys that were at or near Hall of Fame level, and as you would expect, the Steelers get the edge defensively pretty much in every category. As we've said many times, one of the greatest defenses of all time. I think Nathan was talking a little bit off the air about how if you look at both teams' secondary strength, so that would be the 49ers defense versus the Steelers offense, because if you
the 49ers. The 49ers offense is their breadwinner there.
Bread and butter.
That's the bread and butter. That's what they're known for.
Right.
The Steelers are known for the defense. So if you take you call them weaknesses, but not really weaknesses. But if you take the 49ers defense and compare it to the Steelers offense, who has the better one?
Right. Well, we touched stat wise. We touched on the statistics a little bit there. If you for example, if you take a look at scoring, 49ers. Let's see here. 49ers defense was third, and Steelers offense was fifth.
Right.
So, as we just discussed there, a little bit edge there to the 49ers. How do you look at that situation?
Yeah, let me make a couple comments. First of all, it's hard. The only way we can analyze this is the way we're doing it, right? Because you really don't know what kind of game plan would be put together. Yeah. You don't know who they would try to attack or not attack. I mean, in fact, it'd be really neat if we still had one of the Madden games. We could simulate the sit-this game, and see kind of how it played itself out, which would be neat. In fact, if any of our listeners out there have it, simulate for us and hit us up on Pressbox Pod and let us know how it comes out. That would be awesome. But I look at this, and I look at the secondary, okay? The 49ers secondary, Donnie Griffin, Darryl Pollard, Ronnie Lott, and Chet Brooks, the four of them together had 11 interceptions. Lott had 5 of them from his free safety position, okay? You look at the Steelers, Ron Johnson at left corner, Mel Blount at right corner. Each of them had 4 interceptions, okay? And Donnie Shell at strong safety had 3. My point being is that it would be hard, as much as the 49ers like to dink and dunk that West Coast offense and throw their backs, I don't know that you can really attack those corners for the Steelers. You know what I mean? Now, you're going to be able to get the ball downfield deep against Mike Wagner with Jerry Rice. No question about that. But I'm not sure that the Steelers that the 49ers secondary have enough weapons there. You could probably game plan to take Ronnie Lott out of it and attack with Stallworth and Swan, some of those other guys. So you see what I mean? So it's a little bit easier to see the Steelers maybe moving the football a little bit.
Would you say that if you had to have a weakness on defense between either a cornerback or safety, you'd rather it be a corner because it's easy? I mean, wait a second.
Depends on what defense you're playing, right?
Well, what I meant to say was, don't you think it's easier to... If you have don't you think it's easier for an offense to take away a star cornerback, just don't throw it his side? Right. It's hard to take away a safety because they roam over top and they
Agreed.
That's what I was trying to say.
That's a really good point that I didn't think of, and I appreciate you bringing it up. So it'd be hard to not game plan. I'm saying
it'd be hard to not get to game plan away from Lott than it would be to game plan away from a 49ers cornerback.
Correct.
You know what I mean?
Correct. No, that's a really good point. And again, if you look at the 49ers, they played a 3-4. I mean, they played a 3-4 type defense. They had Haley, Millen, Walter, and Turner, and Romanowski playing in there. I see the Steelers having some success running the football against that, with Franco Harris and Rocky Blyer. So, but yeah, I mean, gosh, it's such a tough matchup analyze.
Coming in, I think that I would have heard an argument for either team to win this game and probably been okay with it. For the numerous reasons we talked about. For me, though, I think that just coming down to what's most likely going to be a close game, you give the edge to Montana, like the drive or not
the catch.
The one against
I'm thinking the quote unquote the drive is Elway's thing, but I'm talking about
against Cincinnati in the Super Bowl.
The Super Bowl, right?
Yeah.
The game winning drive, him coming through with Dwight Clark on the original catch.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a drive attached to the catch. No one talks about that.
Right, that's true. Just always finds a way to get it done, and it's like Jordan with the ball at the end of the game. You can't it's hard to bet against that type of thing. Whereas, as good as the Steelers' defense is, you just can't count on that offense like you can the 49ers offense. So that's why I would give the edge to the 49ers and see them winning this. But again, like I said, if I would hear an argument for the Steelers as well.
Well, and I agree with everything you said. And if you look at, we know in a game like this with two stellar football teams, there's going to be quite a few punts. And, the 49ers, John Taylor was a very good punt returner and kickoff returner, but mostly punt returner. The Steelers had some good punt returners too, but I think the 49ers had a little bit of an edge there. And then ultimately, this game could come down to a field goal.
Yeah.
And when you look at the 49ers were 80% on their field goals. The Steelers were only 46%.
Yeah, that's less than half.
That's less than half. So now part of that it didn't really affect them, did it?
Right.
Because they didn't need it. Right. But if you're going to need a field goal and you got a field goal kicker that makes less than half of his field goals, like Nathan mentioned when we were talking off the air, what if you drive down the field and it stalls and you got a 47-yard field goal? I mean, to win the game. I mean, that could be a big difference there. So.
All right, so I'm gonna say 49ers. Do you agree with that?
I have no problem with that. Okay. Score, it's got to be close.
Yeah.
Do you see it as high scoring or do you see it as?
That's a good question. I see it in the 20s.
Yeah. 24, 21 or something like that.
Yeah. Call it 24-21.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. All right. So we have determined our greatest Super Bowl champion of all time to be the 1989 San Francisco 49ers with a 24-21 win over the 1978 Pittsburgh Steelers. So we've done it. We've got our Super Bowl champion, our greatest Super Bowl champion of all time. They will join the 1998 New York Yankees,
right.
Who won our World Series bracket. And we were talking off the air. Our next series is going to be the NBA, right. Which should be a lot easier because it's probably going to be the Bulls.
Well, who's going to win that one? I wonder what team's going to win that one.
I mean, we were talking about that off the air, that when you sit down and make your list of 8 teams from each, I guess the question is going to be...
Which Bulls team?
Well, not only... Now, my point is... Here's my point. When we look at the Eastern Conference champions, right, it's going to be a lot of Bulls, right? They're going to be in the mix. But when we look at the Western Conference, that's going to be the real challenge because there's going to be a lot of Lakers, but outside of the Lakers, who was there, right? In the East, you got the Knicks, you got the Bulls, you got the Celtics. I mean, there's a lot of great teams in the East.
Plus, even if you think it's going to be a Bulls team, which Bulls team is it going to be? So be sure to tune in.
That's exactly right. And also, maybe now we'll ask for your feedback on the front end. Before we get started in our NBA bracket, send us your feedback on who you think should be in there. And we'll take that into consideration as well. And what we're also going to do is, when we're done with all this, we're going to analyze the 1998 New York Yankees, the 1989 San Francisco 49ers, and whoever comes through on the NBA side and talk about those 3 teams, not necessarily who's the greatest team amongst the 3, but more who's the greatest team with their impact on sport, society, culture, and all those other factors that we look at today with social media and all those other things. So I've enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. Perhaps some tougher matchups here. Or football, I think, on the whole, especially like this, is a little bit tougher to analyze than some of the baseball matchups. But I definitely enjoyed it as well, and I'm content with our champion we crowned. I think it's a good team.
I am too. So we appreciate your feedback. Remember, at PressBoxPod is our Twitter account. Hit us up there. You'll see the brackets. You can give us your feedback. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.